let's kick this off. Welcome everyone who has joined our webinar. My name is Ben Lawrence. I'm the Chief Business Officer here at KCF Technologies. I'm not your presenter today, but I am your host. I'm the MC that's going to be working with our guest and walking all of us through the presentation that he has prepared. So over the course of this webinar, we anticipate the webinar is going to last anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And at the end of those 15 to 20 minutes, we will have an additional 10 minutes or so to field your questions. So at any time during this presentation, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please type it into the chat window, and either myself or our executive assistant, Jessica Turco, will be online, and we're going to make sure that we get through as many of those questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. As far as our guest goes, our guest today is Brian Hroncheck. And if you haven't seen how his name is spelled, I'm going to guess where you put the H in his last name. But Brian Hroncheck is a leading reliability engineer for U.S. Steel, where Brian has documented millions of dollars in savings for the company using budget that he did not have. So I'll say that again. He documented millions of dollars in savings using a budget that he did not have. And I've seen Brian's approach for how he actually finds money for his programs. He has a presentation that he gives to his senior management entitled, "No Budget, No Problem." Right, Brian, you know that. And through that presentation, through the pitch, the story that Brian has learned to tell, I have seen him win over approvals from lots of different departments within the companies where he's worked, including IT, procurement, plant management, corporate leadership, and most importantly, frontline workers. All of those audiences find a motivation to say yes by the time Brian has told them his vision. So how many of you on this call today, a question to ask yourselves, how many of you would love to hear yes from your leadership for your multi-year, multi-vendor, multi-million-dollar vision, even in the middle of the worst economic crisis that we've faced in our lifetime? If you say yes to that, then pay attention, because Brian knows how to do this. And before joining the American industrial world 6 years ago, Brian spent his entire career sharpening his skills and his team's skills as an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps. You're going to find, as we go through this webinar today, that Brian is fearless, he's enthusiastic, he's very well read, and he is committed to elevating American manufacturing to a place of global dominance. So Brian Hroncheck, welcome to the webinar. We look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Geez, thanks, Ben. I think I owe you a hug after this one. That was pretty good. I appreciate the intro. And I'm just gonna jump right into it. Before I get into the introduction, I'm gonna tell you guys a quick story, right? This is a story of continuous improvement in the Marine Corps. And we don't call it continuous improvement, we call it something else. But picture this for a minute. Picture a platoon of Marines, all right, amped up on Red Bull and adrenaline, running towards an objective. They have a mission and they have an enemy, and they're not going to take no for an answer. They're not going to take failure. So Marines headed towards the objective. There's all sorts of indirect fire, overhead aircraft dropping bombs, lots of coordination. These guys going into the objective, kicking in doors, clearing rooms, and at the end of the day, They clear the objective, and it's time to celebrate, right? So pitch the tents, guys. We're having Viking night. We're going to pull out the best MREs out there. We're going to celebrate this. And you know what? Just set up a loose security for tonight. We've got the enemy on their heels. It'll be fine. We'll really start digging in tomorrow, right? Says really no platoon commander ever, because the next thing that happened, if a platoon commander did his homework on his combat physiology, he knows that coming down off of the adrenaline, every single one of his Marines are going to pass out uncontrollably and just be wide open for a counterattack from whatever enemy it was that we were facing. So we're going to rewind it, and we're going to start this story over again, right? We're going to do this one more time.
So what you're saying there, Brian, is that when a platoon of Marines takes the hill or wins the territory that it needs, that's only the beginning.
It's only the beginning. So let's do it again. So the platoon is headed towards the objective, amped up on Red Bull and adrenaline. There is indirect fire and artillery, overhead aircraft. They're kicking in doors. They're taking the objective. We succeed in taking the objective. Enemies on their heels. And immediately the platoon commander says, nobody sits down. Everybody start digging in. We're going to do 50% security, 50% position improvements. We're going to call up our engineering assets from the rear to bring in HESCO barriers and maybe some more better fortifications. We're going to have each position create the maps of interlocking fields of fire. We're going to identify where the enemy's avenues of approaches are, and we're going to do some pre-planned targets. And then, to make things worse, we're all going to get up and we're going to start patrolling. We're going to patrol the area and make sure nobody can sneak up on us. And we're going to have air superiority and some aerial reconnaissance to make sure that in the long range we don't have anybody, looming over the horizon. And in that way, we never see the enemy again because we're just too hard of a target. We're too far ahead. And that's the end of the story. But it's not, right? So the objective is to always be so far ahead of your competition that they can never catch you, right? In the Marine Corps, we call it continuing actions, right? So you never sit down, you never get complacent, you never fall asleep. Always actions to improve your position and your place in the world until it's time to move on and make the next place better, right? But in the civilian world, we call that continuous improvement, right? So I'm going to tell you today why you will never be good enough, right? This is lessons in continuous improvement. And it's not coming from Arlie Ermy, but he's always welcome on the show.
And Brian, when you say you will never be good enough, I remember the first time that I heard that, you were giving me a version of this presentation, and I felt terribly. I'm like, what? My mom tells me I'm good enough. So, but
I hate to tell it, but your mom's not doing you any favors.
No, well, exactly.
So I'm going to help you out. I'm going to tell you today, you're not good enough.
This is a positive message, right? The fact that you're not good enough. What is the underlying message there that we need to hammer home?
Every time you improve your environment, you're in a new environment that has new opportunities for improvement. So no matter how good you get, you've never arrived, right? So that's really it. No matter how far you get, you've never arrived.
Yes. Good. Thank you. So what is it that you have in store? How do we bring this back to the concept of continuous improvement and what it means for the industrial world?
Well, that's what I'm going to jump into. And really, this is just the beginning. This is kind of like if you picture a flashing beacon on the top of a hill or a lighthouse and you're in the ocean. I'm going to flash the light a couple times so you know which direction to go, but I can't do it for you. Nobody can. But hopefully this will get you pointed in the right direction so you can start doing it for yourself.
Sure.
All right. So let's talk about why continuous improvement. And the real question is, how much value can you create? Okay. So I put together this equation. I don't know if this is real or if there's more to it or whatever, but the value of the individual, VI, right? As the value of the individual increases, the total value of the organization increases. So if I get better, my organization gets better. Or if, like we see over here, if all of us get better, the sum of the population gets better, then the total value gets a lot better. So let's think about the example of like go way back in time, a hunter-gatherer family. I like going to extremes because it helps to illustrate the potential for change. So a hunter-gatherer family, wake up in the morning, dad goes out to hunt a dinosaur, mom goes fishing, the son grabs some firewood, the daughter gets some berries, and at the end of the day, the value of that family's effort is dinner, right? So not really, kind of convenient that they lived in caves if that's where they lived, because you really don't have to do a lot of work to build a cave, because they spent most of their time getting food, right?
Right.
So imagine taking 1,000 hunters and gatherers and putting them through all sorts of training regimens and becoming 1,000 skilled workers. Then what can they create, right? So you picture the ship on the right. So those 1,000 skilled workers can put together a ship like this. And at the end of every day when they go home, they've got enough money not just for dinner, but for their house and their cars and their phones and their entertainment and their clothing and some savings and possibly someday, a retirement, so that they can stop working and actually just live, right?
Yep.
Not only that, but what they've created, this ship, is valuable to someone else. So the work that they've put into it now can help somebody else carry goods and services across the ocean, because it's a whole lot easier to put it in a ship than it is to swim it on your shoulders. Right? You can get a whole lot.
Brian, I've seen that a lot, not only in the companies where you've worked, but across a lot of our industrial customer segments, where there are some folks who are just born with this drive to continuously improve, but they're almost stuck on an island, right? I would bet a lot of the folks on this webinar today, they are those driven people. They're always looking for a new way to grow, to learn. So how do you take this concept of continuous improvement, not just for yourself, but deploy it across an entire team?
It's coming.
All right.
I put this arrow in here just as a reminder, though, that this goes both ways. And think about what happened with the coronavirus. And I hate that everybody uses the coronavirus as examples now. I thought I wasn't going to do it, but it works both ways. If I'm 1,000 skilled workers and all of a sudden we quit working and quit trying, we can become the hunter-gatherer family. And there's examples out there right now on social media of people who have started hunting for food, and picking berries just because they ran out of cash and they ran out of resources. So it goes both ways, but the question is, how much value can you create? Now here's a good example in history. I love history. History teaches us everything, right? So you guys remember the story of where marathons came from, but most of us don't know the whole story. Whole story is Persia shows up in Sparta at 490 BC, and they brought way too many people, way more than the Spartans had, and so the Spartans are like, well, we need reinforcements. So they get their professional runner, Phidippides, to go take a message to the marathon. So Phidippides runs 140 miles one way, takes him 36 hours, gets the marathon, and he says, hey, we need some help on the front lines. And Marathon says, roger that, we're on the way, go tell them that we're on the way. And so he runs back 140 more miles, 36 hours the other direction, to tell them, hey, Marathon says they're on the way. And he says, that's great news, but grab a sword, it's time to fight. So he fights with them, and eventually they win the battle against Persia, even before Marathon shows up. So they say, Phidippides, this is so awesome, go tell the king that we won. He runs 26 miles to Sparta, and tells them that they've won, and falls over dead from a heart attack. So the value of the individual, right? It took him days to take that message, and eventually he just falls over dead, right?
Right.
The challenge is there a better way to do it? And the Chinese were sending messages by smoke signal. You could travel 300 miles in a few hours. So that's increasing the value of the individual. That's working together as a team. So instead of leveraging one person and saying, do this, there's a little bit of training, a little bit of setup. Now we can send messages very far in a very short amount of time. But it took somebody wanting to improve on that.
Yes. So it's all about leveraging your entire team to build the solution together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, correct. And I'm going to get to the whole teamwork aspect of that here in a minute.
Yep.
So I just came from Fairfield Tubular down in Alabama. And down there, we had this example, right? Our conversion cost for steel is somewhere in the $400 to $500 per ton range, right? So if I can save 25 cents a ton, if I'm an engineer and I'm smart, intelligent, and I come in with a great idea, I've got this thing with a great ROI, we're going to make some money on this. It'll save us 25 cents a ton, right? I just saved us $150,000 a year, right? But we've got 600 employees. And so if 600 employees all get involved and each one in their area finds a way to save 5 cents a ton, it's 18 million. Power there is empowering the people to be continuous improvers, right?
Yes.
So continuous improvement means more efficient operation, greater market share, thrive, survive, and really the ultimate goal for everybody here is the family, the future, and the stability, because we're not at work just to make our employers rich. We're at work so that we can have some time with our families, right?
Yep.
So you want your front line involved. And so here's the answer to your question, but how, right? So I always think back to my time at Charlie Company at Paris Island. I was the company commander of the recruit training company for about a year. And that was one of my, I think it was the favorite duty station that I had in the Marine Corps, right? And over the course of that time, I walked in and the morale was very low. The performance was very low. And through a series of really just getting everybody engaged in that continuous improvement idea, creating a vision, getting them all moving towards the same goal, and then really just supporting them. All right, we went from being the lowest to being the absolute best in the regiment. And that was, attrition rates, the absolute lowest. It's the record scores in most of the graded events, the very top, and really high morale. So it was really got to get your front line involved. I couldn't do it myself. All right, I had to do them. But the question that I'll pose then is, let's war game the outcomes. Is it more important for me as a leader to be a continuous improver, or is it more important for my team to be involved in continuous improvement? Which is more important? So we're going to start with neither one of us are involved in continuous improvement. And I hope there's Star Wars fans out there because you guys will recognize this, right? So if I'm not a continuous improver and my team is not a continuous team of continuous improvers, the organization is stagnant and it slowly dies, like the belly of the sarlacc. You're going to digest over 1,000 years. It's eating you for lunch, basically, right? So that would suck. But we're all experiencing that, or many of us are. We're experiencing that in different organizations. So what happens if the leader is not a continuous improver, but the team is, right? And I was involved in this in my last position, in my last, I'll say my last job at a different company from US Steel, right? So I wanted to be all involved in continuous improvement. The culture was not there. The leadership didn't care, and I had to leave. And I'm sure I was replaced by somebody who just wanted to nod up and down and do it just like the rest of them. So what happens? We gravitate from here back to here, and we all end up digesting in the belly of the sarlacc, right? Yeah. So the alternative, if I'm a continuous improver as a leader, right, and my team is a continuous improvers, right, the organization improves quickly. We have the best culture in the industry. It's one of the best places to work, is ranked by Forbes best places to work. Everything is awesome and everything's great. We lead the industry, right? Of course, the converse to that is, what if I'm in continuous improvement but my team is not? Well, that's all right. Some may be inspired to improve. Others may leave and be replaced by those who do, and we'll gravitate up here into this corner again, and we are now leading the industry again.
Brian, something that I've seen you do at US Steel that I think sets you apart from a lot of folks that struggle, right, to instill this culture of continuous improvement is many of the unicorns out there who are just driven naturally and want to drive continuous improvement. They're constantly trying to win every battle themselves. They give every pitch themselves. They look at every report that we send them by themselves. And one of the things that I've seen you do is that you are constantly involving other people, educating them, training them, including them in your meetings. So the takeaway, at least for me, that I've seen from you is you are always looking to involve others in the conversation early and often. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. And I'll take it a step further. The best piece of advice that I ever heard was from a young supply officer. So you think of a young lieutenant, 22, 23 years old. He holds the budget for the battalion, and for the colonel, who's in his mid to late 40s, maybe almost 50, and he's got a whole lot of experience and a whole lot of power, right? So the supply officer has the potential to be the guy that says, hey, it's my money, I own the budget, I'm telling you what you can and can't buy, Colonel. And the Colonel's like, yeah, I'm going to crush you. It's like, that's not how it works.
Right.
Best advice came from the supply officer. He says, it's not my money, I'm the steward of it, He says, my job is to be the best advisor that I can be. I'm not here to tell the colonel what he can and can't do. I'm here to tell him what it's going to cost, right? So from that perspective, my job as a reliability engineer or as a continuous improver is to make sure that my bosses are fully educated on the cost of every decision they make. If you want to continue to do business as is, this is what it's going to cost. If you want to change, this is what it's going to cost or how it's going to improve. So really the only option here, the best option is that you're a continuous improver as a leader, and because that's really the only way your organization is going to survive. It's more dependent on you than on your team.
Good. And we have about 5 more minutes until Q&A. So
yep. It up right now.
Bring it through to the end here. Good.
All right. So but if you're going to be that continuous improvement leader, how do you do it? Right. Self-education and formal schooling and life experiences all add up to be a continuous improver. And it starts with that self-education, right? Over the last 6 years, I've read probably 40 books on professional topics, not like, fun read books, but they've been fun, but they're all on topics to make me better as a individual, better as an engineer, better as a leader, right? So read, because the more you're putting in your head, the more models you have to look at the world through. And the more models you have, the faster you can make decisions. And if you read this one right here, John Boyd is going to tell you all about the power of making decisions quickly. But read at least 4 books once a quarter. Read once a quarter, or up to 12 times a year. 12 books. Just keep piling it in your head because it pays back. The other part of that is the formal schooling, right? We all have goals, career goals. Get out there and get that official, that certification, that education. Get your planning and scheduler certification. Get your SMRP, CMRP. Go to Stanford or Harvard. Get on these online schools, especially right now. The schools are available more than they have ever been online, right? And that's the only way. So one of my favorite people out there, and I know he's very controversial these days, but he's got a long and illustrious history and career in the Marine Corps, and he says read, because if you don't read, you're learning the hard way, and that's expensive, right? So always read.
Yes.
So that's really what I have. The why continuous improvement is because it's the sum of the individual values in your organization. Never stop improving, and as a leader, you're the tip of the spear. Remember to read and lead.
Very good. Brian, thank you. You cannot hear it because we're all muted on the webinar, but there is a thunderous applause right now for your presentation. I could hear it if I just put my ear to the window. But we do have some questions that have come in. We have about 7 minutes left for questions. I've actually gotten a few here by text message. So I'm going to read one of these to you. First question is, Brian, how did you persuade your leadership team at US Steel to invest in KCF technologies and other Industry 4.0 programs?
Yeah, so great question. It started in Fairfield. That's where I was hired on at US Steel. So in 2018, having already worked with KCF, I knew what to expect, and I went to him and I said, I want to do this. We're trying to improve reliability. This is what I want to do. So I kind of negotiated with the boss a little bit, and he says, well, I've never experienced them. Let's try them out. All right, so it's okay. We'll do a case study. Case studies are great. So we spent about $50,000, and that was back before KCF had this awesome service-oriented, type of costing. So we were actually purchasing the equipment back then. We spent $50,000. And over the next 3 months, I documented over $300,000 in savings on just a couple of our pieces of critical equipment. So that's all it took. And at that point, they were all nodding up and down. They were like, yeah, we got lots of critical equipment. We got lots of opportunities. Just go ahead and start moving forward. So
yes,
I can't say it was only that, because a lot of it builds on credibility. I teach a class on the DMAIC process for our Lean Six Sigma stuff internally, and I tell them that it's not about the data first. The credibility is what comes first. If you are the guy that's always the bull in the room and always telling everybody they're wrong and very abrasive, like that's great. You might be 100% right, but nobody wants to support you. But if you're always there
Right.
supporting, offering good advice, always on time, always have the right answers because you've done your homework first, then they feel they can trust you. They're going to get a whole lot of leeway. So
Yep.
starts with credibility, definitely progresses with a good plan and a good test, and then from there, it's, you know, everything will become history fairly quickly.
It's interesting because you mentioned a $50,000 investment where you documented, and I've seen your work, Brian. You documented with your own internal calculations vetted by your team a 6 times ROI within the first 3 months. And I will tell you, just, you know, we work with about at least a couple hundred different industrial organizations across North America, and that's about in line. So when you choose the right applications and you do your homework, in this case along with us, but when you do your homework and you choose the right battle up front, every person on this webinar should expect a minimum 5 to 10 times ROI in that first year using your numbers. So you're right on track, Brian.
So here's the
We have
other
another
thing.
question that's come in.
Well, let me add one more thing to that
Yeah,
before we move
please.
on. The other thing is, you know, the education part. You have to do your homework. Somebody up at this plant back in 2018 tried the same thing with KCF, but put it in the wrong application. You have to know what you're doing up front, or you're going to design the wrong test and you're going to see really terrible results. So make sure you do your homework. It's all up here. Read and lead.
The technology does not deliver the return on investment. The technology applied to the right problem drives return on investment. So yeah, boy, maybe we should do a whole webinar series on that. Second question that came in, what is the #1 problem that KCF has helped you solve?
I think it's been visibility. So at our mandrel mill down in Fairfield, right, we have these great big, I can't even tell you I think the 14,000 kilowatt volt, I don't know what it is. I'm not an electrical guy. Big motors, big rolls, and great big gearboxes. And for years, everybody was just, you know, doing the annual inspections and just dealing with it as it broke. By putting the sensors on the gearboxes, and we only put one on the input and one on the output, we started tracking failures years ahead of having to do anything about it. So instead of being reactive and saying, well, there's a possibility we're going to lose $1.5 million and take a week to get this back up because we just don't know, now I was showing him the data month after month as the problems progressed, so we could determine the right time and the right budget to work in the maintenance and prevent that from happening. So I think just creating that visibility, it's like opening up the curtains and shining it on a room full of dirty, nasty laundry, and all of a sudden you see all the nasty laundry and you can start making a laundry plan to clean it all up. You know, so that's probably the biggest one.
I like what you say, visibility, just visibility into the problem. So good, thank you. Brian, we have 1 minute left. So final question for you. And this is my question for you, but in one sentence, what is the #1 takeaway that you want our audience to walk away with from the time they spent today with you?
You're responsible for yourself. So the more that you can learn, the better position you're going to be in to help your own organization or to jump ship and find a better organization. And you'll be that much more valuable to that new organization when you get there. You're responsible for yourself. Do everything that you can do. Learn. Never stop learning, and never stop improving.
Very good. Well, Brian, any of us who've had the privilege to work with you or spend time with you understand that this is not something that you only preach. This is something you practice, and we are really honored to list you as a customer and excited about what you have in store for U.S. Steel. Thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Bye, everyone.